I'm writing this about half a year since all this started, I think. I've lost track of the days. Anyway, there's still electricity and running water by some miracle, and even the internet still works. I should explain myself. As I mentioned, it's been about 6 months, and my life has gone down the drain. Let me tell you what happened starting on that first day. It was Monday. As I recall, early hours. I woke up as usual, made myself a cup of coffee, browsed the news, Instagram, and some Reddit on my phone. Everything seemed fine, although I did find it strange to be so quiet. I live in quite a large apartment complex. It was the type from the 70s or 80s with that depressing Soviet era design, but it was home, and the stairwell was quiet. I could normally hear the chatter of my neighbors from the other side of the walls. The walls are thin enough to allow that, but all was quiet. I opened my window and checked outside, cigarette still hanging in my mouth, still holding my mug of coffee. At first, I didn't notice that there was no birds chirping and the distant rumble of cars. I could only hear the early morning breeze sway the tree branches in the park across the street. I stuck my head out a little further to see the streets below. No pedestrians. No one is going to their cars. Strange, I muttered to myself while I checked the clock. It was 7:05 a.m., and the streets would normally be quite full about now. I personally didn't worry too much. It was a 10-minute drive from work, and even if I were late a few minutes, my boss wouldn't notice. As for the peculiar silence this morning, I told myself it was just a slow morning, and I continued on my morning routine. When the time came, I dressed up and exited my apartment. I descended the long flight of stairs. The sound of my feet hitting the steps permeated and echoed throughout the building. When I came outside, I walked up to my car. As I was about to unlock it, I remembered. Oh, damn it, cigarettes. I smoked the last one with my coffee. I had to buy a new pack. I jogged to the nearby kiosk and prepared my wallet. Morning, pack a. As I was about to finish the sentence, I looked up for my wallet and saw that the kiosk still had the shutters down. Oh, hell, are you kidding me? I said to myself as I looked around to see where the woman who usually worked there went. They don't have a toilet in there, so she probably went to relieve herself. I thought. I thought of just going to the local grocery store, but I seriously didn't want to wait in line for one pack of cigarettes. I'll just buy them at work when we're on break. There's a gas station near there. I returned to my car and started driving through the relatively narrow streets of my neighborhood. I always took a path where there was little traffic, though I had to go through a part where I sometimes get stuck at a red light with either 10 cars in front or behind me or both. Today was my lucky day, I thought. I was the only one at that part. Well, I saw absolutely no other car on the road today, actually. I found it strange, but I threw it into the back of my mind. When I parked, besides my own car, I only saw two other cars in the parking lot. The question marks started popping in my head. I checked my phone, and sure enough, it was Monday. Sundays are normally the time where the city's half empty. I checked the internet for further confirmation, just in case my phone glitched or something, and yes, it indeed was Monday. I exited my car and began walking towards the building. It was locked, which is strange. Luckily, our boss had a spare key in a small hole a few meters from the door, so I managed to get in. Completely empty. Even the lights weren't on. As I walked through the hallway, flipping the lights on, I saw no one. I went to the boss's office and knocked on the door. No answer. At that point, I started calling my coworkers, with no luck. I called my boss, no answer. I called my best friend who works the night shift as a taxi driver, and he should be heading home right about now. No answer. Maybe he's got a customer. I sat at the cafeteria befuddled. What the hell was going on? I then tried to call my parents. They always answer. Nothing. I called probably everyone in my phone list, some of them multiple times, and no answer. I started to worry a lot at that point. I went outside, then a thought came to my head: the police. I typed in the number for police and hesitated for a moment. Is this an emergency? Well, I see it as such for myself. No one is answering me, and none of my coworkers came to work, nor did my boss. So, yeah, it's quite an emergency. When I rationalized my decision, I clicked the dial icon and waited for a response. There are no free dispatchers to answer your call at this moment. We will connect you to a dispatcher as soon as possible. My confusion turned to fear. No way. I'll just wait for a minute. The minute turned into minutes soon after, and then after a full 20 minutes of the same automated voice repeating the same message, I canceled the call. I couldn't stand this anymore. I went to the bathroom and splashed my face with some cold water, looked into the mirror and started slapping myself. You're just dreaming, man. Come on. Wake up. Wake up. And I was not waking up. At that point, I said, you know what? Screw work. Screw everything else. I'm going to check on my parents. They worried me the most by far. As for my coworkers and boss, they might have played a prank on me and be laughing their asses off. I didn't care. My parents were not answering their phone, and neither did the police. My pops and mom live in a small town outside the city, about 25 minutes drive tops, if the traffic was on my side. I entered my car and started driving. No one was on the damn road. No one. Not a single damn car. I took that opportunity and hit the gas. As I was about to enter the highway, I slowed down, as if my body was sensing something was wrong. Then moments later, I hit something. The airbags activated, shielding my face from the impact. I was conscious, thank goodness. If I haven't slowed down, I would have been a goner. The car wasn't in a good state. I could tell even before exiting, but when I did come out, there was nothing in front of me. Nothing in front of the car. Confused, I started walking around to the front to assess the damage, and then I hit a wall. An invisible wall. I fell on my ass. That hurt more than the car crash itself. I got up, put my hands on my head, and located the wall. I hit it with all my strength. It didn't budge. I only ended up hurting myself even more. It was as hard as steel, even harder probably. It stopped my car, but I wasn't going full speed. If I would, I probably would have died. Nonetheless, I still needed to find out what was going on. I attempted to start up my car again, to no avail. I had no choice but to walk, and walk I did for more than 10 kilometers back. As I walked, I saw no one, no people, no cars, no animals, nothing. The city was completely dead and barren, save for myself. I decided to take a detour towards the town center. I foolishly waited at a tram station, like public transit was working when there was no one to drive the trams. I continued walking and came to the center of the city. It was a clear, beautiful day, warm day. The center should have been filled with activity, especially at noon, but it was as empty as the rest of the city. I came to the main train station. Across from it was the statue of a king that had once ruled our country long ago. Behind the statue is a beautiful park with a Baroque style building which is used as a theater. I wanted to sit down and rest to try and think of any explanation for what was going on, but I lacked one thing: nicotine. I couldn't buy them. I was hesitant to rob any of the kiosks, knowing my luck the entire city would spring to life the moment I take a pack that I hadn't paid for. Even so, it would be hard to rob a kiosk with the shutters that are still down. I thought of any place where I could grab a pack, then I remembered a coffee shop where they sell them. I basically jogged to that place. It was locked, of course, but the doors were made of glass. Screw it, I said to myself as I grabbed a small coffee table from the outside terrace and threw it through the door. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the street. It actually scared me. It was the loudest thing I had heard since I crashed. Bingo, I said to myself as I managed to force my way inside. Absolutely empty, as I expected. I went behind the bar and looked for where the cigarettes were, and I found it. I took a few packs with me and thought, I might as well get myself a beer. I need one. And so I did. As I finally satiated my addiction, I decided to go on my phone once more, this time on the internet. The coffee shop surprisingly had Wi Fi still on. I scrolled through the news to see if there was anything on this situation. I did find news articles a few hours old, some even minutes old, but nothing pertaining to the entire city population disappearing and a giant invisible wall blocking the exits. Social media was active, nothing strange. I found a live stream of a festival in the center today. Well, I was in the center. I saw the center of the city bustling with activity, music, and laughter. And I kid you not, the person live streaming passed the coffee shop I basically robbed. It was packed and the door visibly in one piece. I stood up and went outside, only to see the empty streets I've been observing the entire day. I was literally in the same place where the person live streaming was, and yet I couldn't see them. And they couldn't see me. I tried to leave a comment or a message in chat, but it wouldn't send anything despite of me having a good connection. I had a mental breakdown, to say the least. I'll save you the details. Let's just say that well-decorated coffee shop was trashed. After I calmed down, I decided to try and find some way to get back home. There was no public transport, and I had no car, and I wasn't planning on walking back home. So I tried my luck at breaking into a car. That went as well as you'd expect. Breaking a window and opening the door is one thing, but the problem is I have no idea how to hotwire a car, and my ears were bleeding from the alarm. I wised up and searched for a tutorial on YouTube. Thank God I had the internet and tutorials on how to hotwire a damn car. The second attempt was successful. When I came home, I knocked on my neighbors' doors. I didn't expect much, but it somehow made it easier to accept my new situation. In a way, I had to confirm to my brain that we were all alone. I got into my apartment and locked the door as a reflex. I knew I didn't have to, but it didn't hurt, and I felt a bit safer that way. I went to the bedroom and crashed on my bed. I was exhausted from today. I had to rest, and I swiftly fell asleep. Then I was woken up by something unexpected, a knock on my door. At first, I was startled. I thought maybe all of this was a dream, but then I saw the bruises on my hands from the crash and the fact that I was fully dressed. Despite that, I rushed towards the door, but as I was about to put the key into the door, I stopped. I had an uneasy feeling. My body refused to follow my orders. It was the same feeling I had just before the crash yesterday. This time I was cautious. I took a look through the peephole I had on my door. At first, I saw a silhouette of a man, but when I took a closer look, the man had no visible features. The guy had no eyes or nose, nor did he have a mouth. I jumped back at the realization. A nightmare, I thought, but that was quickly followed by the thought of how do I stop him as he or it started banging on the door with its full might. The door is thick and designed to deter robbers, but I pushed a small armchair against it for good measure. He kept banging non-stop for a few minutes. I had taken a kitchen knife and was hiding it behind a corner if he were to break in. Then he stopped. After about a minute, I decided to take a peek through the hole once again. He was thankfully gone. I sighed in relief and sat down on the armchair I had put up as a barricade. I took a look at my phone. 7 a.m. Geez, did I sleep long. I thought of who or what the man was for a few minutes. I laughed to myself at the absurdity of the situation and the fact that the guy reminded me of those IKEA monsters I've heard about. After some calming down, I remembered that I hadn't closed the window when I left for work. I got up to close the window, but as I took a look outside, I saw in the figures of dozens, if not hundreds, of creatures being slightly illuminated by the lamps in the park across the street. I stared wide eyed as I saw some of them being as tall as the trees. Some had a resemblance to dogs, being on 4 feet with paws. They had human skin and a vaguely human face, small black eyes, and a sadistic smile plastered on their face. Some were small, some were massive. I couldn't describe to you the variety of freaks I saw. Among them, I saw the same faceless man dressed in a business suit and a hat. He was on the street and he was looking at me. We stared at each other for a few moments. Then he tipped his hat and turned around. I exited my fear induced trance and tried to hastily close the window, but before I could do that, a massive hand grabbed my arm. I tried to wrestle free, but the grip was too strong. It tried to pull me out. I saw it was a creature with a long, thin body and disproportionately large arms and head. Its head had that smile and small black eyes. That bastard climbed the wall and was now staring into my soul. Before it could throw me out, I managed to grab the kitchen knife I put on the table next to me. I slashed at its massive hand. It let out a demonic shriek that nearly deafened me. I thrust my knife at its head. In its attempt to evade my attack, it lost its grip and fell to the street. I closed the window, though I could see hundreds of those creatures swarming towards the entrance of the building. The bigger ones waited outside, presumably guarding the streets if I managed to escape. There was no escape. I couldn't go out the window. I lived too high up, and even if I were to survive the fall, those big bastards are waiting outside and God knows what else. I heard dozens of footsteps rushing up the stairs. I reinforced the existing barricades as much as I could. When I turned back to my window, I could see a hand with an eye on its palm on the window. They were watching. I closed the blinds and turned off most of the lights in my apartment. I could hear them banging on the door. I couldn't believe that my door could withstand such a beating. It withstood for hours. I hid in my closet for the time being, clutching onto my knife. The banging suddenly stopped. Then I heard a huge crash from the hallway. I could hear multiple footsteps coming toward the room I was in. I peeked through the closet and could see long shadows approaching my room. I didn't know if it was a good or bad thing that I had left the lights on in the kitchen. I wouldn't have seen their shadows otherwise. As I prepared to fight for my life, the sun peeked through the blinds. I could hear the creatures hurrying to get out of my apartment. Even though it was safe, I didn't exit the closet for more than an hour. After I did, I inspected the damage. The door was completely and utterly demolished. Whatever delivered that final blow catapulted it off its hinges to the end of the hallway. The armchair was in bits and pieces, as well as other things that I put to hold the door. After calming down a bit more, I brainstormed the situation. I remembered the faceless abomination started knocking at around midnight. I suspected those things came out at night, and from what I briefly saw, they aren't mindless drones. They are organized and intelligent. Well, some of them at least. I couldn't stay at home anymore. I had made myself a strong coffee and drank it quickly. I took a bag and filled it with everything that was necessary, food primarily, but also some tools. I managed to find a crowbar I had, which will come in handy. I filled the trunk of the car I stole yesterday and made rounds around the city. I scavenged for supplies as well as scouted for some better place to hide at night. I managed to break into some places and get some useful things. I also managed to break into a police station and found a key for the armory. Jackpot. I had some armor and firepower, primarily two pistols, and a semi-automatic rifle. I filled the bag I had with me with as much ammunition as I could. As per the armor, ride gear was the best option, I think. A sturdy helmet and Kevlar armor. After I filled the car to the brim with things, I scouted for a good place to stay, and I found it. A small, now abandoned shop with an attic and basement. The surface of the building was flat enough and without any holes so the boogers could climb. The storefront was not entirely out of glass, but I had to board up most of it. At the attic, I had two windows that gave me a view of the entire street. Good thing was that the shop was the tallest building in the immediate vicinity, so none of those creatures could get the idea of climbing up, but I should worry about the tall creatures. They could still reach the two windows, but I can't do everything. I didn't have time. The building I barricaded was in a good spot. The houses in the street were basically fused together like the apartment complexes. Not all of them, though. The shop was at the end of the street, and I had a clear view all the way up to the other end. There was no left or right from my perspective, only forwards, so I could funnel them in and could have a clear shot. I prepared the semi-automatic rifle and waited for midnight. As the clock I put on the wall struck 12, in the blink of an eye, the faceless man in a business attire appeared in the middle of the street. He looked up at me, and I aimed toward him. He tipped his hat and disappeared with the wind. Then the silent night was pierced by distant shrieks and screams. I turned off the safety on the rifle. Milon l'Abbé.